The day I said enough and found my true strength, I never imagined I'd reach such a low point where everything I'd planned would fall apart before my eyes. My relationship with Maria Eduarda and her family was always complicated, but I always tried to let it go. My mother-in-law, Marissa, was always a problem. It was as if I was never good enough, but I endured. I endured until the day my patience finally ran out. The trip to Italy was my last-ditch effort to bring everyone together, to show that I wanted to build something, not just play the role of the silently accepting son-in-law. I wanted it to be a gift, a chance for us to escape that routine full of hurt, disguised insults and manipulation. But the truth is, the trip was never meant to be for the whole family, at least not in the way I thought. When Marisa and Maria Eduarda told me I couldn't go because it was a trip just for their family, the ground sank beneath my feet. I felt invisible, as if my will and effort were worthless. It was a slap in the face. It wasn't just the trip, it was everything that came before, and I'd always let it slide. That sentence was the final straw that made me open my eyes. I stood there, unsure of what to do, filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and shame. Anger at being treated that way, sadness that the woman I chose to live with didn't have the courage to stand up for me, and shame at having let it all happen. But deep down, I knew I had to do something, or I would end up destroying myself, along with everything else. The decision to cancel everything wasn't easy. I spent hours looking at the reservations and tickets, wondering if it was the right thing to do, if I wasn't overreacting. But in the end, I understood it was the only way to show that I wouldn't accept being excluded, being treated like an outsider within my own family. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was a cry for them to understand that I deserved respect. At that moment, as I pressed the button to cancel the tickets and reservations, I felt a strange mix: relief, fear, guilt. I knew I was going to hurt a lot of people, especially Maria Eduarda. But I also knew that continuing to pretend everything was fine wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed to protect myself. I needed to take action to change that situation. When I told them my decision, their reaction was explosive. Marissa, of course, played the victim, as usual, blaming everyone, especially me. Maria Eduarda was torn between her mother and me, and that hurt me deeply. It was the moment I realized there was no going back, that what we had built up until then was crumbling, but that it was necessary. The worst part was seeing the despair on my father-in-law, Joan's face. He was someone I respected, someone who always tried to mediate conflicts, but deep down, he suffered in silence because of his wife's behavior. He apologized and asked me to try to fix things, but I was so tired of trying that I knew it was too late. And he ended up going the same way: divorce. After that fight, the cancellation, everything became crystal clear to me. My relationship with Maria Eduarda was beyond repair. The respect I needed to be a partner, to be a husband, simply wasn't there. She wasn't happy, neither with me nor with her mother, and this ended up destroying us. The separation was painful, but necessary. That dream trip turned into a nightmare, but it was also the wake-up call I needed. It was when I began to see what was really happening in my life, what I'd accepted out of fear or complacency. It was a moment of clarity, of understanding that sometimes to move forward, we need to leave behind things and people who only cause harm. In the days that followed, I felt a crazy mix of emotions. It was as if I'd lost everything, but at the same time, I'd been given a chance to start over. The pain of seeing my family fall apart was great, but the feeling of being true to myself was even greater. I started thinking about myself, about what I wanted, and not just what they expected me to be. I never imagined a mother-in-law's manipulation could carry such weight. Marissa controlled everything, and I was just a pawn she manipulated for power. And worse still, the woman I loved, my wife, let this happen, not because she wanted to, but because she was afraid. I understood that I couldn't save anyone who didn't want to be saved. It was at that moment that I realized I didn't need to carry the blame for what went wrong. I did what I could, tried to be patient, tried to talk, tried to build. But when the doors closed to me, the only way out was to break away. I could no longer live in that situation that consumed me and made me feel small. The shame of what happened on the trip stayed with me for a while. Knowing that Maria Eduarda, her mother-in-law, and her father-in-law were alone out there, penniless, because of me, left me conflicted. But I knew they had choices, and I could no longer be the only one sacrificing to maintain something that didn't exist. For weeks, I thought about everything I'd experienced, trying to understand where I went wrong and where I'd been wronged. It was a tough but necessary reflection. I had to accept that my family wasn't the one I'd dreamed of, that there were limits I couldn't cross, and that love, to be healthy, requires respect, not fear or control. My father-in-law's decision to separate from Marissa showed me that I wasn't alone. He, too, was tired of that toxic, controlling relationship. This gave me the strength to believe that, despite the pain, change was possible, even if it meant breaking everything first to rebuild better. I confess that in the first few days after the trips were cancelled, I felt like a failure. It felt like I'd destroyed everything I'd built up until then, that I was worthless as a husband, as a son-in-law, as a man. But little by little, I began to understand that the real failure would be if I continued to accept this situation that was hurting me. One thing that really struck me was the unexpected support from Lucia, my sister-in-law. She was one of the few who understood my side without judgment or resentment. She, too, couldn't stand her mother's behavior anymore and decided to stay away from the trip to avoid conflict. This showed me that I wasn't crazy, that there were people who felt the same way. From that day on, I began to look at myself differently, with more care, with more respect. I understood that my peace was worth more than any attempt to please a family that didn't value me. It was a slow and difficult process, but I began to love myself more, to believe that I deserved better things. I won't lie, I was filled with anger for a long time. Anger at Marisa, who destroyed everything, at Maria Eduarda, who didn't have the courage to defend me, at the whole situation that felt like a trap. But this anger, when channeled, became fuel for my change, for my personal growth. In that moment of rupture, I also realized how alone I was. I had people around, of course, but no one who was truly there to support me. It was a painful loneliness that forced me to look within and find strength where I least expected it. The pain of separation, of divorce, was immense. A mixture of sadness for the loss and relief at escaping that toxic cycle. I cried, screamed, questioned, but I also began to rebuild myself, to get back on my feet as best I could, even if with small, uncertain steps. In the midst of all this, I learned that we can't save anyone who doesn't want to be saved. Maria Eduarda wasn't ready to change, nor was Marisa ready to acknowledge her mistakes. I had to accept that love isn't enough when respect and support are lacking. This was one of the hardest lessons I've ever learned. The moment I cancelled everything and said enough was the turning point in my life. It wasn't just the trip I was cancelling, it was the cycle of disrespect, manipulation, and lack of consideration I was ending there. I was beginning a new phase, one where my voice and my feelings mattered. After that, I started taking better care of myself, seeking help, talking to friends, and going to therapy. I needed to learn how to deal with pain, anger, and loneliness, but also cultivate hope and faith in myself. It was a painful but liberating process. Today, when I look back, I see that that day was the hardest and also the most important of my life, because it was the day I stopped accepting less than I deserve, that I put myself first, that I began to truly respect myself. I know I still carry the scars of that story, that the pain doesn't disappear overnight, but I also know I won't let it define who I am or who I'll be. Overcoming is not an endpoint. It's a path we learn to walk every day. If I could speak to Andre from that day, I would tell him to have courage, to trust that life can be better than what was there, that even when it seems like everything is falling apart, we can get back up and build something new, more just and true for ourselves. I learned that family isn't just about blood, but also about those willing to walk together, respect and support. And that sometimes we need to leave behind people who don't want to or don't know how to do this, to make room for healthier relationships. The weight of Maria Eduarda's betrayal and Maurice's manipulation was enormous, but it didn't kill me. On the contrary, it made me stronger. I still have difficult days, but today I feel freer, more whole, more myself. After that breakup, a lot changed. My routine, my plans, my way of looking at people. I started to value more those who were truly there for me, those who respected and loved me for who I am, without manipulation or false promises. I also understood that self-respect is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, love, affection, money, or anything else is useless. I needed to learn to say no and set boundaries, even if it hurt. It was a journey full of ups and downs, moments when I doubted myself, when sadness overwhelmed me, when it seemed like nothing would get better. But it also involved a lot of courage, a lot of persistence, a lot of desire to start over. The trip to Italy, which seemed like the end, was actually the beginning of my transformation, because it revealed everything I needed to see to change my story, to seek a more dignified and happy life. I won't lie, I still miss what could have been. I wanted a close-knit family, I wanted everything to work out. But I've learned that wanting isn't always enough, that we can't control other people's choices. Today, I'm rebuilding my life, with less fear and more hope. I still make mistakes, I still feel pain, but now I know I can overcome them, move forward and be happy. The process of overcoming grief wasn't quick or easy. There were days when I just wanted to give up, throw everything away, but the desire to live better, to respect myself, spoke louder. I'm sharing this story here because I know there are people going through similar situations, feeling that anguish, that loneliness. I want them to know that change is possible, that pain doesn't have to be eternal. If I could do it, anyone can. We just need to find the strength within ourselves, even if it seems like it no longer exists. And little by little, with patience and courage, build a new story. In the end, I became my own hero. Not because I won everything, but because I didn't give up on myself. And that's the greatest victory anyone can have.